Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is TIANTONG, and I'm currently doing my PhD in the US. And today I'm going to talk about my ongoing PhD research on Gardens by the Bay. I call it planting an urban mega project. So Gardens by the Bay is not only an urban mega project, but it's actually also a massive botanical collections. So everyone knows the super trees and also the two domes. And the formation of this whole Gardens by the Bay also symbolizes Singapore's ambition to be a global city. Of course, everyone celebrates this as a great human achievement. But this is also, if you take a deep look, they're actually hosting more than 100 million plants in this massive landscape. So here I recognize a very interesting planting logic that exists in Singapore. So from here, I began to argue planting in Singapore is a nation building strategy, but also a mode of urbanizations. So from here, I raised two research questions. The first one is how national building materializes through planting in Singapore. And the second is how does the planting process revolve a larger or broader networks through the formation of Gardens by the Bay. And to answer these questions, I go back to the histories and I look for the beginning of everything. So this famous picture is showing Lee Kuan Yew planting a tree in Singapore, and it started the Garden City movement in Singapore. And from here, it's also the moment when the planting activities actually interact with the idea of nation building and urbanization process in Singapore. So from then, especially between 60s to 80s, all the mass media in Singapore began to promote tree planting as a nation actions and also nation duties. And from here, we also see the idea of making Singapore to look green actually align with the urban idea of ordered, modernized, and also clean. So we begin to see where are those planting to green happening in Singapore. It's actually all along the most visible areas in Singapore, which are, for example, the streetscapes. And if we take a deep look, what are those trees? We will see these trees are actually only limited to 40 species. And all those species are actually fast growing to be able to green up Singapore in a very short period of time. So here we see the planting actually operating on two levels. The first one is as a greening tool to treat the urbanization and also to discipline the people in Singapore. And the second, the planting is also an ongoing act of nation building and push forward for the urbanization further. And in Singapore specifically, we also reconcile the nature forms within the political narratives itself. But the turning point is at the 90s, we're asking for more colors. So from then on, we began to planting more colorful plants. So the idea actually shifting from garden city to city in a garden. So like our previous UNPAC's official saying, Singapore Island is a garden, it's not just a city, but we grow a city within a garden. So we see the idea actually shifting. And from here, where we are going to planting plants actually also changing, like switching from streetscape, but also to the idea of to create a mega project. So here we go, we see the launch of Gardens by the Bay. The planting continues to play a very key role in this agenda of not only making a city in a garden, but also a global city. So we see these two pictures are showing very real plants in this world from Thailand, from South America, are transplanted to Gardens by the Bay to show the image of everything about global, but you don't really see what Singapore's plants over there. Another really interesting story is this tree with vibrant pink flowers, which was naturally growing in Argentina, and we transplant them all the way to Gardens by the Bay and plant them massively over there to mimic the Japanese cherry blossoms. And we now call it Singapore Sakura. So it actually further reflects a broader network, especially the transnational plant networks. So if we take a deep look at the super tree itself, we can see 18 structures of them actually hosting more than 150 million of plants on top of each other. And they are also selected for their high visual interest and also their capability of to grow without the soil. And then the same logic also applied to these two domes, which are always temperature controlled all year round. And within them, you will also see the flower shows. And the flower shows is also quite interesting. You can see the Lilytopia, what is happening right now is actually a planting collaboration projects between Gardens by the Bay and different embassies. So this one is Italian's embassy. So they connect Gardens by the Bay with the Italian local nurseries to helping sourcing those lilies and transplanting them and also making this display. So here, we see from garden city to city in a garden, planting is no more than a simple greening along the streetscape, but actually more about collecting and displaying. And further, it also shows Singapore's global ambitions. So to conclude, I just want to argue for the planting in Singapore is a nation building tool, but also a mode of urbanization as well. But another story behind that is actually when I was watering my potted plants in my little garden that day, I see a lot of spontaneous plants actually going out from within the space where I set my plants. And another very sunny afternoon, I had a very unexpected guest knocking on my door. It's this little lizard. I think this is a video. I don't know if this can play. But he was knocking on my door, and I thought like he's asking for help. But I really don't know how could I help, so I called up the NParks. So the NParks arrived with a lot of tools in the hand, and we spent the whole afternoon over there trying to catch this little guy, but we failed. So at that moment, I actually realized we as humans, we actually don't know how we can deal with this unruled lives. So begin here, sorry, yeah, it's knocking the door. So this actually informed my further questions into my future studies, is how the study of planting actually can signal a shift that to understand modern humans more as a multi-space entanglement in the urbanization process in Singapore. Thank you very much.
Okay, who would like to respond first?
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And I believe this paper is a demonstration of an innovative framing of planting, no, as an active and basis for a multi-scalar mode of urbanization as well as nation building. And I found the research very interesting and maybe worth replicating. I would like to ask the Megaproject Gardens by the Bay can be understood to play a dual role. The first role could be as a national heritage project, and it could also be a global tourist spectacle. Do you think these dual roles or functions would conflict in the future, or they will go together while you are introducing that mega project as a national heritage project, and at the same time you can advocate it as a global tourist spectacle or initiative? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what you just said is actually what Singapore is actually currently doing. So because the Garden by the Bay right now you see is actually the Bay South, but the whole project actually has 3 parts. So what we are doing right now on the Bay East is actually called Memorial Garden. So the Memorial Garden is actually, there will be a tree walk that all the VIPs in Singapore planted the trees previously. So we are retracing all those histories and planting again in the new opening, I think in the launch of Bay is probably in 2028, sometimes over there. It's not only retrace the tree itself, because the tree, of course, is kind of like already become a heritage in Singapore itself, but also they even going back to where the trees are coming from. So they actually tracing all the back from where the Lee Kuan Yew imported the ring tree from the South America. So it's actually basically, how should I, like directly copy again the history itself, but I think it implies Singapore think the planting is a methodology itself can be always kind of like keep going. Yeah. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for the paper. I think I've read now through its iterations, and I think it's really, of course, fascinating as a research. I know you follow a little bit this trajectory of the kind of history of the branding of Singapore. Mm-hmm. For me, if I missed it, I think you forgot one. So it started as Garden City, but then the Tropical City of Excellence, right, was the next. And then the City in the Garden, and then City in Nature. So I think following that kind of branding and paralleling it not just as this is what it was, but actually what it means as a shift in an attitude, no? So Garden City is a notion that we know has a long history of garden cities. Globally, a lot dealing in Western and then implanted during colonial time. But the Tropical City of Excellence, to me, as the kind of second iteration in Singapore, I think is, for me, what I find very interesting about that is it specifies it by putting tropical city, no? So I think looking and then going to city in a garden, which is, I think, of course, also an interesting inversion of Garden City, and then now City in Nature. So for me, I suppose if this is a PhD research, you could have a whole chapter just about the shifts of the branding and governance, or more branding, and how it's reflecting more global paradigms as well. So I think that would be interesting to kind of follow through a little bit more. In the space of a paper, probably not so easy, but and then the nation building discourse to me is also super interesting, and for that I think you can still add quite some references, and even about Singapore, Bianca Rinaldi has been writing papers. There was a paper published in the Journal of Landscape Architecture, where she uses nation building through planting and using the case of Chandigarh and of Singapore. Okay. So I think you absolutely have to read this and reference it, because it's, I think, well, it explicitly uses Singapore in relationship also to a very charismatic leader like Kuan Yew, but also Nehru. I mean, the kind of the parallels she makes with, say, design hotshots and charismatic leaders through a comparative case study would also be interesting to look at. For me, the thing that you kind of come to at the end, I mean, this notion that we have already 1.5 million plants in the gardens by the bay, but a lot of them are exotic. I think also you start talking about this spontaneous planting at the end. I think you could also look at the work of Peter Del Tredici. I don't know if you know this name. So as a man who teaches at Harvard, he's the head of the Arboretum at Harvard. And he's written recently that maybe we can also understand, so there's been a long argument, we know, between native and exotic species, right? And he said maybe that argument is a bit outdated, because maybe we have a new native that comes because of the changing conditions, and where maybe something becomes introduced, exotic, and it becomes native over time. So I think it's a little more interestingly complicated, and I would suggest you start with his work and then look at his references, because I think the way he nuances the kind of that argument of native and exotic is super interesting. And then for me, also wondering also that we've got kind of gardens, and then we have street trees. For me, it's more a question maybe than, but I wonder if we also start explicitly thinking more, instead of bringing plants from Italy or whatever. I mean, how can we have public spaces and cities in nature where also the nursery, the tree nursery becomes part of a design of projects, instead of just, again, a kind of neo-colonial extractionist project of taking materials around the world and bringing it to where who can afford can have whatever they want. But if you think of more of as a kind of homegrown nursery story, and that's where I think, interestingly, it could link to your notion of the multi-species, So if we start developing not just kind of gardens, which informs gardening, but if we start thinking of creating new nature, and with new nature comes multiple species, no? So I think you could expand a little bit your discourse in that. Again, it's not a critique of the paper, because I understand a paper is a paper, and this is your PhD. Yeah. So, but for me, it's these, say, five other things that I suppose you could weave in really, really well to make it a super strong thing. And for me, what would be so nice about it is it doesn't get stuck in describing a case, because I think a lot of times research can get stuck in being overly descriptive of a case, but using the case to be the window to much bigger ideas. And in this sense, this project is a window to many very big and super important themes, so that can be kind of opened up.
Thank you so much.
Are you responding? No. Okay, so sorry, I have an out-of-date schedule, so I'm just catching up. Yeah. I'm a bit confused on one thing, and maybe you can respond, and then I have an idea. Yeah. Planting as a form of urbanism. I think that you have the planting side of things covered, but urbanism is a big topic, and I feel that you need to explain within that big topic what you mean. Yeah. So, what do you mean by urbanism?
I think right now I'm thinking about like not really like urbanism, but more like an urbanization process.
So what is that?
So it's more like how, if I'm more talking towards the multi-species, I will see, I'm trying to understand how the plants actually active. I don't know, I always be hesitant to use the active, this word. But being also an agent and play a role inside how we actually building up the Singapore.
So planting as a form of city building?
It's more like an entanglement.
I guess yeah, you just need to take a look at some scholarship on it, and like position yourself in relation to something in terms of, you know, is it about planning new districts? Is it about redevelopment? Is it about, you know, a type of infrastructure? Like, but just simple languages of urbanization. And is it an extension of one, or is it a sort of hybridization of another? Is it a reinterpretation of a standard one, or you know, a new thing? Like, just quite straightforward. And then the shift to, because you say a form. So what are the forms, and how is it another form of it? It just has to be laid out, I think. And then you have a shift in your project to the non-human nature. So I guess that's like a new question, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, you've got one part of your project, planting as a form of urbanism, question mark, or here's a case study. And then you have a question mark, non-human nature as a form of urbanism. It's going to be a different form of urbanism, right?
Yeah.
So we really need to understand the first one in order to see how the other one is quite different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in that it might hold your project together. But the key thing is to really define what you mean by urbanism. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got no minutes left. Time is up.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. This is the Mapanwepe Lake at the crater of Mount Pinatubo, which in recent years have become a hiking and camping destination. Who would have thought that the eruption of this beautiful creation is the reason for a disaster in the 1990s that buried thousands of square kilometers of land and displaced a multitude of households in central Luzon, Philippines? Maps detailing exposure and vulnerabilities to various hazards, such as these sample maps of the Philippines, now allow for improved management of risks that intends to minimize damages and casualties. Risk is commonly associated with the probability of exposure to hazard or danger. The challenges that communities' resilience caused by disasters result to the disruptions in conventional living modes and displacement of the population when forced movement compels people to move from their original location to a new unfamiliar place or a relocation. A place is defined as a mix of people, space, and ecology. Exposure of a place to hazards that result to disasters significantly challenge the concept of permanence and blur place identity. This study seeks to understand how the adaptive capacities of relocated households influence placemaking in post-disaster housing relocation. The study looked into the case of the town of Bacolor in the province of Pampanga in central Luzon in the Philippines, named here as the place of origin. About 80% of the areas of this place, of this town, were buried in at least 6 meters of lahar. The study employed a place-based approach to investigate the environment and the associated place identity conditions. A semi-structured questionnaire survey and key informant interviews were conducted to assess the influence of adaptive capacity attributes. The perceived meaning of space is studied in the case of Madapdap Resettlement, which is one of the relocation sites purchased by the Philippine government that transformed the 126 hectares of land from a sugarcane plantation to house more than 7,000 housing units for beneficiaries of the Mount Pinatubo disaster. A disaster had a significant impact on the well-being and quality of life of the affected population, businesses, transportation, access, and overall safety, which underscore the urgent need for preparedness and effective intervention plans. The households affected by the Mount Pinatubo disaster underwent various stages of relocation. These processes involve navigating the complex procedures of settling into a new place while striving to have livelihood means, access to basic goods and transportation, and utilizing government services and educational facilities. These factors also significantly impacted the adaptability of individuals and the resilience of families. A strong adaptability between the original community and the host community fosters a strong engagement between people and their ability to shape their surroundings. The results of the survey shows that the resettled households have created new spaces within the new neighborhood, forming bonds with both relatives and connections with new friends. The majority of the respondents indicated that life in the resettlement is better than in their original communities. The talipapa, or makeshift stalls in the perimeter of the major park, serves as a magnet of economic activities. The livelihood dynamic benefits both the relocated residents and the host community members both benefit. The places of worship and facilities are also present in the relocation site, reflecting the practices from the place of origin, though the facilities are designed with lesser designs and ornamentations. Access to the information is also deemed important through information dissemination through neighbors themselves and also by means of the community billboards. Livelihood activities also show a clear reason for households to remain in the resettlement. The availability of livelihood opportunities include retail or selling goods, working in the transportation sector, and employment in nearby industries, allowing thriving in the place. These industries include the different manufacturing and also near an international airport. Several households utilize the front of the house as convenience stores. This benefit work both ways for the seller and for the buyers within a block or a street within the resettlement. Such economic activities or opportunities allow members of the community to rebuild and start anew from the effects of the disaster. So the findings indicate that both human connections and the material relationship between the surrounding environment are crucial for successful adaptation to changes. Social and cultural values, adequate preparedness for both plans and actions strengthens the capability necessary for surviving disasters. Building disaster resilience and advocating for disaster resilient practices are vital steps in creating more meaningful communities. So moving forward, the study puts emphasis on the recurring call and springs hope for us to continue to work together to make the world a better place. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your presentation, GODESIL. In your title alone, you mentioned economic and cultural determinants of placemaking. I just would like to know, how are you going to conceptualize placemaking? Do you think it is more of economic and cultural? But how are you going to consider the physical aspect and the social aspect of placemaking? And how do you think would these dimensions interact?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. The economic and cultural, as well as the social aspects, reflect. All of those reflect in the physical environment. We could see that in the different activities and how the people, the members of the community, innovate, how they make use of their spaces. Because what you saw earlier with the economic activities, those are houses converted into commercial areas or spaces. So those are along the frontage of the houses, and these are reflected or manifested in the built environment or in the design of their living spaces.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to make a follow-up because you mentioned a while ago that people established this kind of bond when they were relocated. And the social aspect or dimension of placemaking is very much focused when you mention that in your paper. So that's the reason why I asked, where is the social dimension in your research? Because the social aspect, when we have the people interacting together, that could be a means or a driver of growth in a certain locality, especially in a relocation area. You want to, maybe you would like to consider that. Okay. I have another question.
Okay.
Yeah. What is your perception of placemaking in the scenario wherein we have a post-disaster? Do you think it is more of a bottom-up or community-driven, or should it be top-down, government-led process when it comes to placemaking?
The case of the relocation sites, of the resettlements, happened 34 years ago. And at the time, the government instituted mostly a top-down approach. But now you're asking about my perception. I see it as more of a bottom-up approach, although we can meet halfway because we need policies, government policies that should be installed in place, standards, of course, that should guide the development of these places. But everyone should not only be consulted, because most of the time the consultations would, well, it's a general observation that the consultations would just be like a face value thing, but it doesn't really reflect everything that the intentions or the needs of the people from the ground. So there should be more participation from the community, because when you hear their stories, there are a lot of stories that the members of the community would tell us.
Thank you, GODESIL.
Thank you.
So I have some comments, but first I would just want to ask a very simple question: is what is your background? What is your...
Yes, my background is I'm an architect, architecture and environmental planning.
Okay. No, because I'm also educated as architect. I'm not educated as urban sociologist or ethnographer. And to me, a lot of your work falls very much into urban sociology, trying to understand perceptions of people and doing a lot of surveys. So I actually have no expertise in that. So for me, well, I found it, because it's not my expertise, I found the paper a little bit difficult, if I'm very honest. And it resonates with some of the comments that came from Dina. Because for me, again, if we understand, okay, a disaster has come, there's a forced relocation, communities are asked to relocate. And you talk about, I thought it was kind of interesting that you said you were guided by 5 sub categories, no? So one, what are neighborhood practices? What are livelihood activities? Access to information, perception about security and safety, and attachment and dependence to place. And so to me, yeah, why not? But how can an architect with our education or our tools do that? I mean, so to me, I think it's very interesting if architects also and environmental planners go outside their discipline to try to understand the world. But to me, you have to come back to our discipline because otherwise it can become naive, no? Because then, I mean, because urban sociology, ethnology, they're disciplines. They have their own methods. They have their own histories. They have their own literature reference, body of knowledge. And I know it's very common today that we're trying, and we talk a lot about multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, and I think, yes, it's all great, why not? But to me, we have to come back to architecture and to environmental planning, because that's what we know and that's what we can do. So for me, you talk about a place-based approach. I don't know what is a place-based approach. To me, urbanism is always based in a place. So the notion of place-based approach, I know it's now also a kind of common catchphrase, but for me, we just have to be a little careful to become more precise. Because I think, and for me, what I think would help, is this part of a bigger research project, or
Yes.
a PhD, or
A PhD,
a PhD?
yes.
So
Under urban
it's
design, yes.
About?
Under urban design.
Under urban design.
Yes.
Because that's, to me, the part would become interesting, is to understand how this case, so from an urban design perspective, how do we as urban designers, or how does urban design or environmental planning qualitatively work on relocation, where we know it's very difficult because it's cutting place attachment, it's cutting livelihoods as they are, and having to create new relations. So to me, I think what you've written is interesting, but then I don't mean to sound rude, but for rhetoric, I say, yeah, so what? No, I mean, I think you still have to bring it back. And maybe of course, if it's a bigger project, I understand that's probably what you're doing. But because for me, if we talk about, you also talk about, I forget the Filipino word, but the kind of informal stalls that you say get. So to me, that's also interesting. Like, can urban design create the stage for informality occur, but to still guide it, to kind of design it a bit? And so that's the kind of stuff I was waiting for, still hungry for. And so I would just encourage you to keep looking for those things, but also to remember to come back. To remember to come back to, because I think the issue and the kind of interesting, super interesting case is a way to make to make projections rather than to get lost in a description. So I would just encourage you through this to kind of go back and then say, okay, what can urban design do with all of this stuff to make something that's better than what they had? You said that many people feel satisfied, but yeah, knowing people's perceptions, but we know how to analyze space, we know how to design space. So I think for me that's what I miss a little bit. But if it's part of a PhD, then it's probably an unfair comment, because this is just a small piece, no? So, but for me, I would just, that's why for me it was a little hard to really be precise about this, because I feel I don't have the tools and the knowledge to really give you help on this piece. So.
Okay, thank you very much and I will consider all the suggestions. And could I respond to that? Okay. Yes, it's part of a bigger study on urban design and PhD, and the ultimate intention is to contribute to that larger system change that will guide policies in the future. Hopefully, even just a small portion of that, that the paper would be able to contribute to that. So this is, yes, a starting point of a larger study. That hopefully I would be able to pursue further in the coming months or year. Yes, thank you very much.
We've got a few minutes. Is our timekeeper? 2 minutes. I guess for me, if I don't know, I just for fun, put in something decolonial. Can you question why placemaking is here in this part of the world, and maybe ask why it's being used here, and where did it come from, and how you're going to reinterpret it, because it has a history. This sort of tool, yeah. And sometimes these tools, excuse me, are positioned as being universal, right? That they're like something you can use anywhere on the planet to be an open designer. But they often come from a certain place where there's a perception that there's no place there. Therefore, they didn't invent a tool to make place, right? And that story comes from a certain, I don't know, urban condition that's got nothing to do with here. So sometimes we have to also either not adopt tools from elsewhere because they may or may not be helpful, or know that they've come from somewhere else and reinterpret them for our own use. So maybe that's something that might also be helpful for you as you go forward on it. Or maybe you want to respond to it. Maybe you've looked into it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What I've found out so far is that the roots of placemaking take from Jane Jacobs and White. That would be the farthest route. And then, of course, we would want to contextualize it in the Philippines, and how it is, how places are being made, and how this because the Philippines is prone to various disasters, and we would want to see how places actually reinvigorate themselves, how they could thrive, how people are able to lift up themselves together with their community members, with their neighborhood, and how that happens. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Good afternoon, esteemed chair, respondents, and committee and audience. My name is KRISTANTI. This is Ruth. We are both lecturers at the Department of Architecture, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Indonesia. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity for us to be here and present our article about hidden ecology. Next. So, the idea of hidden ecology stems from the need to rethink nature-culture dichotomies in architecture in the age of climate change and diminishing biodiversity. Various literatures have started to annotate that it is difficult to completely filter the unwanted presence of nature. The study focused on shifting into nature-culture relation that allow for a more divergent human-non-human nature relations, particularly in the form of hidden ecology. Hidden ecology explores nature out of place as a phenomenon where plants and animals negotiate their space in the built environments. This study is particularly relevant in the Southeast Asia with its climate and wider existence of biodiversity in the built environment. Current discussion of encroachment of wild nature in space tends to discuss how it creates ruptures in the outer boundaries. The study instead proposed that their spaces are actually multi-sited and enmeshed with the built environment. The enmeshed spatiality of hidden ecology in this paper is discussed into two particular characteristics. The first one is how it exists in the space of dankness, where the territory evolves by filling gaps in the built environment or creating a subterranean presence. Another characteristic includes the transformation of built environment materialities, influenced by the atmospheric quality of the built environment. This study employs a qualitative approach through observation and photographic documentation. The data is collected as part of learning process of our urban ecology class at Universitas Indonesia to introduce students to multi-species existence in the built environment. In total, the students collected 87 photos of traces of animal inhabitation found in the built environment.
Students identified 12 different animals with varying species such as arachnids, birds, insects, and reptiles. From the photographs, this study visually mapped and analyzed the data by identifying the location in the built environment, which is indoor or outdoor, the quality of space, and the acts of inhabitation by the species. Is it on surfaces, structures, or objects? Okay. This study explores different sites of negotiations that reflect the multi-sided nature of animal spaces in the built environment. The tables here show various acts and sites of animal inhabitation in the indoor and outdoor environments, as well as the qualities of space, be it liminal or the quality of dankness. The qualities of dankness do not necessarily occur solely in the occupation of underground areas, but may exist through the appropriation of objects. An example can be found in the photograph of geckos hiding inside an enclosed dam electrical box. From such identifications, the study is followed by analyzing the forms of territorial negotiations between animals and the built environment. The first negotiation is camouflaging and filling the surfaces or cavities. The study found that animals occupy space by following the textures or curvatures of the surfaces that camouflage with the surroundings. For example, we found that termites fill the surfaces with their frass. Another example is the wasp that camouflage by hanging on the vertical surfaces in the built environment. The act of camouflaging demonstrates how animals attempt to hide their presence and traces from their surrounding environment through colors, patterns, or textures. This allows the animals to exist invisibly and protects them from external threats in the ruptures, gaps, or cracks. The second negotiation is through the appropriation of loose objects or structures. The animals followed the intersections between objects and edge to attach their nests. For example, spiders that create webs between the ceiling, strings, or around domestic objects. Wasps, bees, and birds are also found creating hanging structures, as well as geckos are found nested inside an enclosed surface. From such inhabitations, appropriating the loose objects enables support and occupations of areas beyond the borders of the built environment, which are identified at the in-between structures and domestic objects and at the corners of space. The last negotiation involves how animals leave traces in the form of dirt, holes, or unused pathways. Some traces of ants were captured in holes where they produced by digging through the underground soil. This shows how the animals hide the process of spatial transformation, yet the material traces exist here and there. Another example that there are termites producing frass, which they occupied and consumed the built environments to absorb nutrients that are later created access and pathways through their droppings. The study found that the animals attempted to subtract the space which provided pathways for them, and they also created some access that acted as guidance for their movement.
Based on the study, it shows that the wild animals negotiate their space by camouflaging their inhabitation, appropriating loose objects, and leaving traces across surfaces. The shapes, structures, and distribution of habitats reflected in such hidden ecology demonstrate animal inhabitations that are distributed in and outside the built environment in an adaptive and responsive way, as well as materially integrated. The study concludes that hidden ecology demonstrates an expanded environment that appreciates multi-species coexistence, informing architecture that focuses on alternative sites of ecologies and the emergence of species beyond their desirable and undesirability. That's all from us. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the paper. I found the paper really fascinating to follow through your revisions also, and was really happy that you took on board some of the suggestions of other things to add to your story, and it was really a very good presentation as well, and nice to see the images. Well, there's some images, but the full set of images, or fuller set. So for me, it's clearly, it's again a thing that's in the air of how to deal with the human-non-human relationships. But I think you do it in a very precise way, so I commend you for that. I think it's quite interesting, this whole story. And I think your categories of kind of camouflage and appropriation and this leaving traces is quite interesting. For me, what I would then like to just maybe add, for continuing, if you're continuing this research, which I think can be continued because it's certainly very big, is really building on this notion of sites of negotiation. I think sites of negotiation, because now you almost have your places of negotiation, say, between the human world and the other than human world, as being in the urban setting, as being kind of as found hidden spaces. But I think what's also emerging in a very interesting way is actually designing for the non-human, So designing bricks, designing materials that also give space for other species to coexist. And there's quite a lot of interesting development in new materials that deal with kind of cohabitation between human and non-human. So I think that would, for me, be a logical, almost next step, and to start to do this in. And I think what you bring up is interesting, because there are some species, of course, we now very easily talk about, we should live together with all the non-human, but yeah, some non-human, I mean, we don't want to live with, I don't want to live with poisonous snakes and, I don't know, poisonous spiders. So, like, how do we encourage, say, non-human species that we can easily coexist with, and maybe encourage other ones in other places? I mean, we know one of the big urban questions is the prevalence of rats. So how to encourage some and how to discourage others and guide them. So I think there's a lot of really interesting work and people you can look to who are doing that. I don't know if you managed to look also to the online feral ecologies atlas. That's really quite fascinating. It's full of very beautiful drawings of feral ecologies, which Anna Singh has worked on with a bunch of designers. So again, crossing boundaries. So that to me would be really interesting. And then there's another person. It's actually an environmental lawyer. Who's a really, every sentence of his you have to read like 5 times because every word matters. But it's very brilliant writing. It's a guy named Jedediah Purdy, P-U-R-D-Y. I can tell you the name. Okay. But he wrote a book called After Nature, A Politics for the Anthropocene. So he's not a designer. He's an environmental lawyer. But he tries to... from environmental law, also understand how we can go beyond the nature-culture, human, not human dichotomy. And that's where I think you can also, if you keep expanding this research, the whole understanding of the rights of nature, So where we start to understand that we often talk about rights of protecting us as humans and our right to this and our right to that. But of course, there's a growing, the rights of nature, whether it's species or rivers, and I think Ecuador even now has in its constitution. So I think New Zealand, so I think there's a whole series of like openings that this research could take you to. And this person I mentioned to you that I see is in your bibliography, this Bjorn Brakke. He's a man who's finishing his PhD at the moment. But he did make this publication that's come out called Cohabitat. But it also has design research in it. So it kind of takes he takes a few species, a few birds and a few frogs or something in the city of Brussels. And he kind of he very carefully maps their habitats, like, and where they go for mating and where they go for this and that, and which kind of, so it could also be another layer. So it's basically, I'm not helping you on the paper, because the paper I think is very good, but it's kind of the next steps for me. It opens a lot of doors to projects that, you could be busy with, I think, for the rest of your life, Because I think it's a project that needs serious attention of research, grounded research, but then also projection. And I think you're kind of at the cusp of almost going to that. So I would encourage you to leap into the projective part of what this could mean to how we can act also as designers and as people trying to understand this negotiation and this coexistence.
Yeah. Well, it took time for me to digest and understand the paper, but I think it's very interesting because the word that is very catchy here is negotiated space. And when we say negotiated space, it could be a shared space. There's an agreement, sort of an agreement, because that's what negotiation is all about. Possibly an agreement between the non-human species and the built environment. I just would like to know what could be the constraints or what could be the factors that would influence this relationship between the non-human species and the built environment, because it would seem internally there's a relationship between the two. As you presented, one of the slides, I saw the ants or the termites, and it would seem that for a short period of time, you will not observe that kind of behavior or relationship. And then after some time, maybe 3 months, you will again see in the same place, in the same space. So what could influence that relationship? Because I have not observed that in the paper.
So thank you for the questions and comments. For Professor Kelly, so the research is actually a part of a larger grants that focuses actually on designing spatial elements. And then when we started, we know that we have to first identify what are the actual contexts and how they maneuver, because of course we cannot like interview them and so on, but it's not like user that we can engage with. So we take really good look and then see the different ways they maneuver that actually different than we thought they should be. So we thought that we should have known them when they come immediately. That when you said they come, but they're actually not. So, and then there are different ways of maneuvering, and there are different conditions that then allow them to occupy the area, and sometimes it related to the human practice. So, for example, we do something that increase the humidity, and then it happens. So, because then the students told us that it happens in where there are certain activities, for example. But then it also happened because of the other conditions like climate. So, for example, in certain season, then there are more occurrence of certain nests, and then when the termites they create certain nests to create their nest basically. So then it all creates particular factors, both our activities, the climate condition, the condition of the built environment itself. So I think that is, yeah.
And I would like to add one more thing, apart from the qualities of the physical properties. Perhaps it's regarding the food, because sometimes humans left food traces there, here and there, and that might also affect to the emergence of the non-human presence, like ants and so on. So yeah, it actually influences each other.
So we think that in the future, it brings a lot of potential of how that findings can be used, whether it can influence the programming of the elements, how they can be designed, and so on. And of course, what animal actually, because usually, as you mentioned in the works of Bjorn Brack, there will be a focus on certain animal. I think that's all.
Can I just add one thing? For me, this is where actually indigenous knowledge can come in, because I think, well, for instance, I was in Cambodia some years ago and talking to some people who were explaining how in front of their house they would put a kind of almost a wall of lemongrass, because they said the lemongrass was known that it would keep out small animals because it cuts them, no? And then the lady explained that they used another plant, and I don't remember the name, and they put it in the eaves of the house because it would keep out bats. Because so they used also certain vegetal elements, bringing nature back in, very specifically certain plants to kind of deter certain species. And then, contrastedly, in Norway, in the city of Tromsø, it's in the north. They've been quite actively developing like little special bricks that have kind of places for birds to nest in the bricks. And they've developed entire facades that have, so at a certain height of the city, they have these where they know the birds. Well, they studied the height where the bird wants to go to. I don't know. They didn't just put them everywhere. They had a serious study, and so I think these kinds of things would also be really interesting to look at different cases. So some more natural, coming almost from basic understandings of people living in different contexts, but then also the technological and with 3D printing and all that stuff, where it becomes, say, easy if you know what you're doing, it's easy to create these special materials. So I think that could also be super interesting.
Yeah. Now I can appreciate what the paper is all about, and it's really interesting. I just would like you to, maybe this is a suggestion on how you could also enhance the paper, is to consider what could be the factors that would differentiate short-term non-human non-human habitation and the long-term non-human habitation. So what could be the factors that would influence that term of non-human habitation, or the duration? Because some would be there for only a few months, some would be there for the whole year. So maybe there could be some factors, favorable factors, that would merit their long-term stay in a certain type of built environment. Yeah, thank you. That's all.